The Brown Palace Hotel in Denver, Colorado opened on August 12, 1892, designed by Frank Edbrook in a Romanesque revival style whose 9-story atrium lobby became one of the most recognizable interior spaces in the American West, and whose triangular footprint, dictated by the irregular lot at the intersection of 17th Street, Tremont Place, and Broadway in downtown Denver, produced an architectural solution whose distinctive shape has made the building immediately recognizable in the Denver skyline for more than a century. Every United States president since Theodore Roosevelt has stayed at the Brown Palace. Eisenhower maintained a suite there during the 1950s as a de facto Western White House. The Beatles stayed there in 1964. The hotel's uninterrupted operation from 1892 to the present, without a single day of closure, is the most frequently cited claim in its marketing and the foundational assertion of its institutional identity. The Brown Palace has changed ownership multiple times since its 1892 opening, passing through a succession of individual owners, family trusts, and eventually corporate hospitality operators, whose acquisition histories document the specific pattern that this channel's trophy asset trap framework, formalized in Case File 068, identifies as the recurring mechanism of prestigious hotel financial distress. Acquisition at premiums reflecting civic and architectural significance, debt structures calibrated to those premiums rather than to operating cash flows, and the progressive competitive position erosion that deferred capital investment produces when debt service requirements constrain renovation spending. The Brown Palace survived every one of those ownership transitions without closing. The forensic entry point for this case is therefore different from most case files in this channel's archive. The building did not fail. The ownership structures placed on top of it failed, repeatedly, while the building continued to operate, continued to host presidents, continued to serve its afternoon tea, and continued to assert its claim to uninterrupted operation with the specific institutional confidence that a building whose lobby has been unchanged for a century can legitimately project. The question this case file examines is not why the Brown Palace failed. It is why it survived when the ownership structures above it did not, and what the pattern of those ownership failures reveals about the specific category of institutional resilience that a genuinely irreplaceable civic landmark can demonstrate even when the financial structures nominally controlling it are in distress. If this is your first case file from this channel, subscribe now, because every episode adds one more layer to what you are about to understand about the architecture of institutional failure. The Brown Palace's ownership chain across its century of operation reflects the specific pattern that this channel's analytical framework has documented across multiple historic hotel case files. Successive ownership transitions, each navigating the relationship between the hotel's architectural and civic significance, and the operating financial performance that any specific ownership structure's debt service requirements demand, with the specific variation that the Brown Palace's ownership transitions have consistently produced financial distress in the acquiring entity without producing closure or significant operational discontinuity in the hotel itself. The specific mechanism producing this pattern reflects the trophy asset trap's 4-stage structure: acquisition at premium reflecting civic significance, debt structure miscalibration to that premium rather than to serviceable cash flows, RevPAR premium erosion as deferred capital investment reduces the competitive position that the premium requires to be sustained, and covenant breach leading to ownership transition rather than to hotel closure. The distinction between ownership transition and hotel closure is the forensic contribution of the Brown Palace case to this channel's archive. A hotel whose civic and architectural significance is sufficiently durable that every ownership structure that has failed on top of it has been replaced by a new ownership structure willing to pay a new premium to acquire the same civic and architectural significance, producing a chain of ownership failures that have collectively funded the hotel's continuous operation through the specific mechanism of repeatedly capitalized purchase premiums. Each ownership transition represents a new injection of capital at acquisition premium prices, whose eventual exhaustion through debt service requirements and deferred maintenance funds the hotel's continued operation until the next ownership transition provides the next injection. The hotel has been continuously funded not despite its ownership chain's repeated failures, but through them. Each failure attracts a new acquirer whose premium payment provides the capital that funds the next operating period. The covenant that each successive owner has failed to read carefully enough is the same one documented across this channel's trophy asset case files. The premium is not a financial artifact available for extraction. It is the condition for the hotel's competitive positioning, whose maintenance requires the capital investment that the premium-calibrated debt structure consistently prevents. At what point does a building's civic significance become a mechanism for attracting a continuous stream of acquisition capital through the specific mechanism of recycled ownership failures? Leave your analysis in the comments below. The appraisal methodology applicable to the Brown Palace across its successive ownership transitions reflects the trophy asset capitalization rate compression mechanism that Case File 068's analytical framework documents, applied to a specific regional market, Denver's luxury hospitality sector, whose competitive dynamics and RevPAR trajectory have been substantially transformed by the broader development of Denver's downtown hospitality market across the decades of the Brown Palace's operation. Denver's luxury hospitality market in 1892, when the Brown Palace opened as the most ambitious hotel project in the American West, was a market in which the Brown Palace had no competitive equivalent, and in which the civic and architectural premium it commanded reflected a genuine absence of alternatives, rather than merely a preference premium above comparable alternatives. Denver's luxury hospitality market in the contemporary period includes multiple new luxury hotel properties whose physical infrastructure, modern amenities, and contemporary service standards represent the competitive alternatives that the Brown Palace's century-old physical plant must compete against, while simultaneously maintaining the historic fabric and architectural integrity that are the primary source of its civic premium. That competitive dynamic produces the specific appraisal challenge that distinguishes the Brown Palace from the Grand Hotel trophy assets this channel has examined in New York, Paris, and other markets whose luxury hospitality competitive sets have developed differently. A hotel whose civic premium reflects both genuine historical and architectural significance, and the specific locational advantage of a downtown Denver presence, whose value to corporate and convention business has appreciated substantially as Denver's economy has grown. The appraisal must simultaneously capture the civic and architectural premium and the contemporary competitive dynamic, producing stabilized income projections that reflect both the premium's genuine durability and the capital investment required to maintain the physical standard that the contemporary Denver luxury market's competitive set has established as the benchmark. The specific appraisal failure that each successive Brown Palace ownership has produced is the underestimation of the renovation capital required to maintain the historic physical plant at the standard that the contemporary competitive set demands. Not because the renovation requirement is hidden, but because each acquisition's financing structure leaves insufficient capital after debt service to fund the renovation at the required level. If the forensic analysis this channel conducts is changing how you read real estate headlines, the like button is how the algorithm knows to send this case file to the next analyst who needs it. The institutional resilience that the Brown Palace has demonstrated across its succession of ownership failures reflects a specific characteristic of its civic identity that distinguishes it from the other trophy assets this channel has documented. Its claim to uninterrupted operation is itself a competitive asset whose preservation creates an institutional incentive for every ownership structure, however financially distressed, to avoid the specific action, closure, that would eliminate the most distinctive element of the hotel's competitive positioning. The uninterrupted operation claim is not merely a marketing assertion. It is the primary differentiating characteristic that the Brown Palace's competitive positioning uses to distinguish itself from every other luxury hotel in Denver, including newer properties whose physical infrastructure and service standards may, in some respects, exceed the Brown Palace's. No new luxury hotel can claim uninterrupted operation since 1892. The Brown Palace can, and the claim's value to the hotel's competitive positioning creates an institutional incentive for every ownership structure to preserve it, even when the financial distress that the ownership structure is experiencing would, in other circumstances, justify closure for renovation or restructuring. The institutional denial embedded in the Brown Palace's ownership chain is therefore the collective denial of every successive ownership that has acquired the hotel at a premium reflecting its civic significance, while structuring the acquisition debt in ways that have consistently prevented adequate renovation investment. allowing each ownership to believe that the hotel's uninterrupted operation claim and its civic premium will sustain competitive performance without the capital investment that the physical plant's age and the contemporary competitive set standards require. That denial is not unique to any individual ownership. It is the structural product of an acquisition financing framework that treats the civic premium as collateral for debt that the premium's maintenance requires, and that the debt service simultaneously prevents. The hotel has survived this structural denial across multiple ownership cycles because the specific value of its uninterrupted operation claim creates a floor below which no financially rational ownership will allow the competitive position to decline. Closure would eliminate the claim, and with it the premium that makes the acquisition worthwhile. The Brown Palace's resilience is therefore not the product of good ownership. It is the product of an institutional asset whose most distinctive competitive characteristic creates a structural incentive for its own preservation that exceeds the incentive for closure, even when the financial structures above it are failing. The Brown Palace continues to operate in downtown Denver as one of the most commercially successful and institutionally stable historic hotels in the American West, currently managed under the Marriott Autograph Collection flag, which provides brand infrastructure and loyalty program access while preserving the hotel's historic identity and the uninterrupted operation claim that is the foundational assertion of its competitive positioning. What the Brown Palace case reveals in the context of this channel's 79 case archive is a specific variation on the trophy asset trap that Case File 068 documents. A property whose civic and architectural significance is sufficiently durable that the ownership structure failures it has survived have collectively funded its continuous operation rather than producing the closures, conversions, or extended distress periods that comparable trophy assets in other markets have experienced. The Brown Palace is not the standard against which trophy asset ownership models are measured in this channel's archive. That standard is the breakers, documented in Case File 075, whose charitable trust ownership has prevented the succession of ownership failures that the Brown Palace has navigated. The Brown Palace is the case that documents what happens when the trophy asset trap's four-stage mechanism recurs across multiple successive ownership structures at the same property. Not terminal failure, but recycled acquisition premium, each providing a new capital injection that funds the hotel's continued operation until the next ownership structure's financial distress requires the next injection. The hotel has been operating continuously since 1892. The ownership structures above it have not been continuous in the same sense. The distinction between the hotel's continuity and the ownership's continuity is the forensic finding of this case file. A civic landmark so durable that the financial failures of its successive owners have become the mechanism of its financial sustainability, rather than the mechanism of its institutional collapse. If this case file changed how you evaluate the relationship between ownership structure failure and hotel operational continuity in civic landmark properties, subscribe because the next case examines a European market's version of the same dynamic. And in the comments, given the Brown Palace's documented succession of ownership failures without operational closure, what specific ownership structure would most effectively end the recycled acquisition premium cycle while maintaining the hotel's uninterrupted operation claim? The case file is open. This content was developed using artificial intelligence tools as part of the research, writing, and production process. All AI-generated material was subject to human review, editorial intervention, and approval before publication. Factual claims, interpretive framing, creative direction, and final content decisions reflect human judgment throughout. This disclosure is provided in accordance with platform transparency standards for AI-assisted content.